This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. It looks like Keir Starmer's ego has been hurt, and he has decided to pen a Substack to justify his ruling of the UK into the ground. I wanted to change it up today. I don't think I could have talked about Harry and Meghan. I'm so sick to the back of my teeth. So I figured I'd switch it up a little bit and bring this Substack to you because this guy is an absolute clown. What world is Keir Starmer living in? He is truly off his rocker, or he is determined to drive the UK into the ground. Anyhow, let me go ahead and begin this fantasy fairy tale that he's telling. With characteristic lucidity, Tony Blair has set out his own contribution to the debate about the future of our country and the Labour Party. This is welcome, not least because I respect his opinion. He is one of the few people in this country who knows what it's like to serve as Prime Minister, and the only other living person to have secured a Labour majority. When he speaks on politics, I find it usually pays to listen. There is much in his essay to agree with. He is right to point out, as he always has, that ideas and policy are the determining factors in long-term political success. Clearly, we have a very different view about the conflict in Iran and more generally about how to balance our long-standing alliance with the United States alongside a strong and sovereign British foreign policy. But at the strategic level, we also agree that Britain must resist the growing clamor to break with the U.S. The security partnership is simply too deep and too valuable to our national interests to throw away in a fit of gesture politics. Besides the current president's central demand of Europe that we take more responsibility for our own defense, it is not unique to him. It was the position of America before he was president, and it will be the position of America after he ceases to be president. There's a good reason for this. It is right. It is long past time for Europe to strengthen its hard power, and Britain must play a leading role. That is why we are introducing the highest sustained increase in defense spending since the Cold War. It is why we are building up a distinctively European pillar of NATO, and it is why, amongst many other reasons, we will seek a much closer relationship with our European allies at the upcoming summit with the European Union. Moreover, now is a good moment to reflect on the government's course. As I said when the results came through, I'm not in the business of ignoring a message from the voters as stark as the one Labour received at the recent local elections. And the signal is that my government needs not just to be better, but also to be bolder. On growth, defense, Europe, energy, and opportunity, we do now need a bigger response than we anticipated in 2024. In a world that has become even more volatile, that is what our change mandate demands. Nonetheless, it will come as no surprise to hear that I do not agree with everything Tony says about Britain or the government. And to explain why, it is instructive to return to the 2024 context and the despairing commentary about Britain's perceived decline. It was a running theme of the campaign. Britain was in an unbreakable trap, a doom loop so fiendish that escape was utterly inconceivable. Higher investment in public services, we were told, could not be achieved without risking the health of the public finances or throttling economic growth. Significantly reducing immigration was equally impossible without much the same effect. The loudly proclaimed truth was simple. Any new government would have to choose between rebuilding the economy, improving public services, or reducing immigration. At best, it was a trilemma. Today, that hand-wringing commentary continues unabated. But the facts about Britain have changed dramatically. After a decade of austerity, a Labour government has delivered record public service investment and performance is improving. We are on track to deliver the fastest reduction in NHS waiting times since the service's creation in 1948. Net migration has fallen from a high of nearly 1 million towards the end of the Tory period of rule to just 171,000 now. Knife crime is significantly down. The asylum backlog has been slashed by 46%, with hotel use also falling. Child care investment has saved working families an average of £8,000 a year, and child poverty is set to fall by over 500,000 children. That is the biggest reduction in a single term of any British government ever. Meanwhile, in challenging global circumstances, the British economy is clearly outperforming our peers. We were the fastest growing economy in the G7 at the start of this year, a situation I was repeatedly told in opposition could simply never occur. Borrowing is on track to come down quicker than any other major economy. There have been 6 interest rate cuts since the election. Despite the conflict in Iran, inflation fell last month, showing that the fundamentals of our efforts to tackle the cost of living are sound. And in every single month that we have been in power, wages have gone up. That is not just lines on a graph. That is not just a doom loop finally escaped. That is more money in the pockets of working people. Now, I'm the first to admit that this escape was not cost-free. Along the way, we made mistakes, most obviously when setting the level at which to means test the winter fuel payment. We also asked a lot of British people, particularly businesses, who now pay higher national insurance contributions. And while we were right to be clear, both during the campaign and since, that it would take a while to turn the British oil tanker around, I do believe that the mood music in the early part of the government was too negative. We should have shown the underlying hope of our direction much more clearly. Yet, in the context of where Britain finds itself now, I remain confident we got the big political choices right, and that ultimately is why I disagree with picking out this or that individual policy and saying it shows a lack of coherence. I'll be blunt, it is simply not a credible depiction of how government works. Government is not a to-do list. You cannot just tick off the issues one by one. No, government is about acting on every major problem simultaneously, balancing them against each other, and trying to get to the best situation for Britain overall. A growing economy needs a supply-side reform agenda. Of course it does. But it also needs sound public finances. It needs strong public services. It needs infrastructure investment. It needs a high standing amongst our international peers and the respect of global investors. It needs an immigration system that retains confidence. It needs a robust policy for our national security. You cannot simply pick one priority and ignore all the other action needed now crises that cross a prime minister's desk every single day. I expect that was true in 1997, and it was certainly true in 2024 when we inherited a situation as bad as any incoming government since at least the 1979 Thatcher government. The question should not be about individual policies. It should be whether or not we have taken Britain forward in a coherent direction consistent with our mandate. I firmly believe that the evidence suggests we have, including on economic growth. However, I also have a deeper, less technocratic disagreement with Tony's argument, because he explicitly says that the rise of political populism can be traced back to Labour moving to the left after he departed office in 2007. In contrast, the global financial crisis of 2008 is not mentioned at all. I have to disagree with him on this. The first embers of the populist fire are surely economic, and I have long believed 2008 to be the moment they were first lit. Yes, Tory austerity then douses them in petrol and makes everything immeasurably worse. But even before that, Britain's economic model was struggling to deliver higher living standards for enough people or places in our country. And the financial crisis itself, including the necessary bank bailouts, clearly called into question the fairness of the entire economic bargain. In fact, I would go further. This is the central truth throughout all the years of Tory chaos and crisis. The fundamental problem was not that they simply failed to deliver the right policy mix to get back to a basically sound model. It is that they should never have been trying to do that in the first place because the status quo was broken. The great moderation was done. Too many communities, particularly those still reeling from deindustrialization, were locked out of wealth creation. And too many people, working class people especially, were ignored as people who could make a valuable contribution to the success of our country. Carers, drivers, builders, shop workers, cleaners, technicians, workers who did not belong to the so-called knowledge economy were left out of our collective story of aspiration. That is why the pandemic touched such a raw nerve. It exposed, in defiance of that story, just how central those workers were to the real functioning of our country. And yet, even then, nothing. The Tory government just carried on, trying to limp back to the broken status quo. This is what any account of the British economy or the rise in populism must acknowledge. Populism cannot be bought off with higher growth and old-school redistribution, though the absence of both, as the Tory era shows, will only make things worse. Nor is it just about living standards or economic inequality, though both clearly matter deeply. No, it is a more profound and subtle crisis. Its roots are economic, but it's also about dignity and respect. Working people and working class communities want an economy that they have a stake in, a state that represents the value they contribute, and a government that can help them achieve greater control over an increasingly insecure world. Any economic plan that does not wrestle with this is on a political hiding to nothing, not just in Britain, anywhere in the Western world. You can try and ignore that. You can double down on the old ways, but the spasms of political chaos it unleashes, the chilling effect that has on long-term investment, the opportunities it gives to grifters and grievance, that is the surest way to making our country poorer that I can think of. And frankly, we don't need to think about it. We just have to look around Britain at what the Tories did. The evidence is all around us. The world has changed. Take, as just one example, the issue rightly dominating headlines over the past few days. Alan Milburn's interim report on the economic fortunes of our young people, because his findings bear all the hallmarks of the old status quo's collapse: systemic institutional failure, economic stagnation, persistent low investment. But also a story that is fundamentally about dignity and respect, about millions of young people, often poor, working class, or disabled, who are so ignored by the established way of doing things in this country that they do not feel success could ever belong to them. I saw this firsthand with my late brother. He had difficulties learning, and I will never forget the way he had to fight every day just to be seen. But there are so many others who have similarly seemed invisible to the status quo. I think of children living in poverty, arriving at school too hungry to learn, teenagers without a place to go in their community, and the millions of young people who are still, even in 2026, looked down upon by some people because they didn't or don't want to go to university. Amazingly talented and dedicated people who have not been treated with the respect they deserve. This is their government. It is why so many of the investments we have made are targeted on young people, in childcare, in new school-based nurseries, in family hubs, in tackling child poverty, in apprenticeships, in technical excellence colleges, in special educational needs education, and in a youth guarantee that will support every young person who can't find work with a new opportunity to earn or learn. Because it goes back to those three demands: an economy that gives working class communities a stake, a state that recognizes everyone's value, and a government that uses its power to give people agency and control. They're not just principles that serve as a guide to fixing our problems or defeating populism. They are the building blocks of an entirely different Britain. A stronger Britain, a fairer Britain, but crucially, a Britain that is truly built for all. A country where everyone, no matter their background, feels they are respected for who they are. That their children will be back to go as far as their talent will take them, and that with hard work, this is what will define their success, not their class, their race, or the community they grew up in, not the educational institution they went to. Their talent and their effort. Personally, I believe that is the most new labor cause of all, the most labor cause of all. But it is one that each generation must renew to face the economic and geopolitical conditions of the moment. That is what this government is doing. You can see it in our Pride in Place program. Yes, on the surface, it is investment in communities and the local public realm. But it's also about respect, control, and unlocking untapped potential, about giving communities the power to decide what is spent in their area, not bureaucrats in Whitehall or politicians in Westminster. You can see it in our supply-side reforms to the economy, in planning reform, infrastructure investment, judicial review, and in stripping out the regulation that stops us becoming a civil nuclear powerhouse. Yes, it's about economic growth and getting Britain building, but it's also about making sure the state can unlock opportunity everywhere in the country, that it's strong enough to overcome vested interests and demonstrate control to a public skeptical that government can deliver for them. It's there too in our energy security strategy. Of course, I recognize that Britain cannot unilaterally tackle climate change on its own, but we are a leading G7 economy. Our voice, our example, and our leadership matters. Moreover, while North Sea oil and gas should and will remain part of our energy mix for generations, it is also clearly a depleting source that has no discernible impact on the global price of oil and gas. Even with our own resources, we are now a net importer of fossil fuels, and that is the single biggest driver of soaring energy bills, bar none. And so, investing in clean British energy strengthens our agency over those markets. It takes control of our bills on behalf of working people. Indeed, wherever you look across the government's agenda, our NHS reforms, our immigration and asylum reforms, our industrial policy, our radical devolution agenda, our transformative power shifts in favor of workers and renters, it is the same story on repeat. Greater security as the basis for aspiration and growth. No contribution or community ignored. Strengthening Britain's control over the forces that shape our world. In fact, even on the issue that Tony Blair most attends to in his essay, you can see those principles in action. Because far from being left behind on artificial intelligence, Britain is at the front of the pack. This isn't rhetoric. Britain is widely recognized by the leading lights of that sector as being a growing and sovereign AI player. No less an authority than Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, has said we are on the cusp of becoming an AI superpower. Investment is flowing into the country, and not just into London, also into building data centers in places like Loughton in Essex, Blyth in Northumberland, and former industrial sites on the Castleford side of Leeds. It is improving our public services, particularly the NHS. And as we build this future, we are taking measures that strengthen our sovereignty, making sure we are an AI rule maker, not a rule taker. It is our principles in action, once again. not just passively accepting our economic fate, but actively shaping the future, taking control, unlocking the potential of the whole country. Is there more to do? Yes, much, much more. Is our welfare system in need of reform? Yes. Is our economy in need of even more growth? Definitely. Do we need bolder policies on everything from the European Union to protecting our children online and the difference we can make now in preparation for higher global energy prices in the winter? Yes, and that is all coming. Are there difficult choices and constraints? Yes, of course there are. Most of all, the unignorable constraint of economic stability. That can never be taken for granted and never will be with my leadership, because at the end of the day, strong public finances are also a source of agency, arguably the ultimate source. If we lost control now, after everything the Tories put the country through, not only would working people pay a very hefty price, but the Labour Party would never be forgiven. One final disagreement with Tony. He argues that this is not about a stronger assertion of labor values. I know what he means. On their own, absence of a plan, values take you nowhere. But Britain does need labor values. It has needed labor values for a while. Our plan is guided by them. Our vision is shaped by them. And the future we are building, a country that feels like it truly belongs to us all, must use them as its bricks and mortar. That is what we're doing. Now, the reason why I chose to read this out loud is because I wanted you to see how insane Keir Starmer is. Like, is it just me, or do all of these globalists have the same personality traits? They're like lying psychopaths who never ever want to take accountability for their actions or responsibility for the mess that they have created. And in this case, sure, Tories are to blame, but so is Labour. Labour has caused a lot of damage in the 2 years that they've been running the government. The other thing that I find particularly breathtaking is Keir Starmer's need to clap back to Tony Blair. Like, he just couldn't let it rest. Tony Blair, if you saw yesterday, spoke out about how damaging these net zero policies have been for the UK. And they have. You just look at the statistics, but in this case, facts don't matter to Keir Starmer, just like Meghan and Harry. They don't care. They will double down on what they feel is the right thing to do or the morally superior thing to say and do. Doesn't matter if reality is completely the opposite. And this is what I don't understand. I don't understand how these people get into power and you can't remove them. I think it's safe to say that this is propaganda. There are a lot of selective statistics that Keir Starmer is rattling on about, painting this rosy picture of how they have this competent government now that they've taken over, and that they're giving people their respect and dignity and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is it's far uglier. Like, he didn't mention anything about the grooming gangs and the problem that they have with integration and communities completely transformed into third worlds. Doesn't talk about locking people up for social media. In my opinion, this is not a government that has taken Britain forward in a coherent direction. It is one that, yes, inherited a mess, but made some of it worse with its own priorities, and now is spinning selective positives while gaslighting on the issues that actually enrage the normal citizens. The anger over the raped girls, the demographic transformation from the illegal migration, the two-tiered justice, and jailing people over their right to speech, the unaffordable heat, and the elite contempt is not populism to be managed. It's a rational response to policies and cover-ups that prioritized everything except the native working class. So it's a bit of a slap in the face to the regular people, and it just sounds like Starmer's trying to save face after Tony Blair yesterday pretty much decimated all of the Labour Party. To me, this felt very disconnected. Keir Starmer does not show that he understands what's going on with the people, and this was really done for the markets. This had nothing to do with the citizens. I think all of this is just empty words. This was really about saving face and creating the optics that everything is fine and what we are doing is the right thing because we're seeing all of this success and prosperity. It's interesting that Keir Starmer makes it a point to say that their focus is on reducing harms online when we know that that's complete bullshit. Because if they really cared about the kids, then there should have been a mention here about protecting the children in the physical world, which we know there is a real serious problem in the UK. But there's nothing mentioned of that. Keir Starmer chooses to select statistics that actually do work out, but they're not so great. You put a PR spin to it, and you can make it sound like he is like curing cancer at this point, especially if you didn't know anything about what's going on in the UK. It would sound pretty rosy to you. As I was reading this, I was like, wow, if you didn't know any better, you'd think he was doing a pretty good job. And that's the problem here with propaganda and controlling information, because when you control information, then it's easy to convince anybody of it being like the most perfect world on the earth when it's really not. And that scares me. It scares me that that can be done and has been done. I would rather know and be warned about it than these people pulling the wool over everybody's eyes just so they can make some money, because that's what this is all about. It's all about prosperity, but prosperity to line the pockets of these people. The citizens aren't getting better. Society really is on a decline, but they don't want you to know about that. And I think part of this problem with the aristocratic elite, the ruling class, like the royal family, are so disconnected to what's really happening in the UK that it's probably why they don't speak up or say anything. The people at the palace that insulate King Charles probably never sees any of this, awful, horrific stuff, because this is all part of the agenda. I think to a certain degree, I don't think the royal family is fully immersed into the horrifying things that are going on. I really don't, especially since there's a lot of people in the palace that are leftists. I mean, look at James Holt. He's also in his delusional little head, thinking Harry and Meghan are like the best thing since sliced bread and progressive to, evolve the monarchy forward. Like, these people are so stupid, like stupid people. But, these are just my opinions. You know what I mean? Anyway, I do think that the UK needs a big wake-up call. And Keir Starmer is not the one to do it. He's not the one. And he's leading everybody down to running this country into the ground. It'll be interesting to see how Tony Blair responds to all of this, because clearly this was a clapback. But I'd love to know what you guys think. Definitely let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. It was such a